go ahead and program my Stream Deck so I can How's your day been?
Good so far. I mean, pretty quiet this morning. I got a little exercise and then just getting prepped.
That part's set now, and the last thing to do is bring up Notion so I can see my notes occasionally.
Yeah.
So. Go. I'm going to be bringing it into here. You monitoring like who's on?
I'm not.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
No, it's fine. It's fine. I don't want to cause an echo or anything. Welcome to the B2B podcasting session. So we've been planning this for a while, and Chris Connor and I are here live, and so Chris, welcome, and it's great to have have this session finally come together.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So why don't we go through intros really quickly? Chris, I'll go to you, and if you could just take a second and introduce yourself, it'd be great.
Sure. I'm Chris Connor. I am the host and producer of Life Science Marketing Radio. And another podcast called CC Life Science, as well as a handful of podcasts for clients, which is my business. I produce podcasts and other content for life science companies to use in their marketing and grow their brand.
So do you do editing for other companies as well, or is it primarily you host podcasts? Just curious.
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I have clients for whom I do editing. I have a client for whom I just help with some editing. I have a client where I only host and do no editing. And then I have a couple of clients where I host and do all the production, and then I hand it off to them for distribution.
Okay.
So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned as well that you're also helping somebody get set up, as well with podcasting as well.
Right. I've done that. Sometimes for friends, I will do that, but also for some clients, they just want to know how to get going with a podcast. And I have sort of a package that I would do to help them understand the hardware and the software and the workflows that it takes to get a podcast out.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure we covered all the bases
I
as we go
appreciate
through it
that.
as well. Yeah, so and I'm Don Davis. So I host the Life Science Success podcast. I also have another podcast as well that I do for a client called Be Fused. Be Fused is a food related or eating related podcast that focuses more on healthy eating and the food that we eat. And so yeah, I mean I host a secondary podcast. I also do a lot of production with regards to sort of extra events that where we produce the capability to get out the message as well for clients. So I have a couple different clients where we support their sort of media releases and things like that. And so whenever they want to do larger broadcasts or almost like the non-webinar webinar, which I know we're going to get into as well as a part of our discussion, but it's just this idea of, yeah, so having a digital media marketing company support that. So I have D3 Digital Media, and that's one of the things that we help to support as well. But I'm really excited to get to hop into this topic. Just really quickly for anybody that's watching or listening, kind of what started this was I attended this year. I attended Bio, and I was actually really encouraged with regards to a lot of the people that were interested in being on Life Science Success. And coming out of that, Chris and I met, and we started talking more about this idea that there just are a lot of businesses that need to get their message out in our space, and there seems to be a real gap where, we're going to cover some of these topics as we go through, but really where we need to focus in on sort of conveying a message out to people about what's going on in a particular company. And so there's a real advantage in terms of having a platform to be able to do it, similar to what we're going to go through today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that, why don't I cover a little bit of the, kind of what we're going to go through in the next few sessions here. So just real quickly, we are going to go through the. We're going to go through three different sessions. One is, why a B2B company should create a podcast, which is kind of this first session. The second one would be much more focused on content and format of the content and format overall of the sessions as well, so that you can get a better understanding of what sort of content should be contained in the a podcast, or what sort of things you might be thinking about from a content and format standpoint, how your podcast might look. And then lastly, technology and distribution, so focusing a little bit more on the technology and distribution in the third session. Then Chris, I don't know if you want to cover the next slide here.
Yeah. So today, just as a quick outline of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about who should be interested individually and as companies. I won't say that every company should have a podcast. I've been thinking about this a little bit. I think it's over the top probably to say that absolutely every B2B company should create a podcast. My brother is a CEO of a company that makes industrial knives. And I was thinking, like, what would be the audience for that, and what would be the topics? And actually, if I thought about it a little bit more, I might be able to come up with something. It also depends on your customers. Are they the kind of people who are going to listen to a podcast? And keep in mind that the podcast itself isn't the only output of these conversations. You can turn that into other content. So it might be a way to do that. Then the bulk of today is about why. What are all the reasons that you might consider a podcast for your B2B company? And then when I talk about the benefits, separate from those reasons that have to do with interacting with your customers and getting that messaging out, there are sort of benefits to creating content through a podcast that are, not directly revolved around the interaction with your customers, but the things you get out of doing this for yourself. So that's the outline for today.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, back to your brother's podcast. I mean, there's that one, what is it, like knife shopping channel or whatever, that's all the time on online, where they show, like, here's all the latest knives, and then they have guys cutting stuff, and yeah. So I mean, I would imagine your brother's topic actually, might be. I mean, I don't know for an what makes an industrial knife, but it might be actually a good one for people to watch.
It's pretty cool how they're made. I mean, it could go on a show like how it's made. As a side note, I used to work at this company. It was started by my dad and my uncle. They make a lot of knives for the rubber industry. I'll just share this just because I
Yeah,
think, amusing.
yeah,
When you get a new tire, there are little hairs that stick out of the side of them.
right.
When those come out of the mold, those little hairs are like a couple inches long, and it's purely cosmetic. But one of the knives that my brother's company makes are kind of like, they look like combs, and they shave those off the tires.
Huh.
I made a lot of those as a
ever thought?
teenager. Let me tell you that.
Who would have ever thought? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And I think a podcast could apply to a lot of different companies, and I'm going to touch on some topics, and because both Chris and I are in life sciences, I can apply some life sciences sort of thinking to this as well. But the applicability of this capability doesn't necessarily have to just be focused with regards to a life sciences company, right? But those will probably be some of the references that come up. So companies that are new to their industry, are ones that definitely could benefit with regards to having a podcast, because it'll give you a consistent platform to kind of get the message out. And I've seen this done well by a few different companies, where they have like YouTube channels, or they have, even just a series of content that comes out on LinkedIn that essentially sort of communicates what the company's about, what is it that they're focusing in on. Also, as a company goes to pivot, right? So if you're a company that's looking to make a shift in direction, what a great way to have a platform where you can consistently communicate that message and get the message out with regards to what it is that you're working on, and how and maybe even why the company is shifting in terms of its focus. And maybe it's to meet your customers or clients even more directly, in terms of where they are. And so that pivot might actually be good to communicate as well. If you're releasing an innovative product, and this is one where I kind of think about my specific marketplace, right? So healthcare in general, oftentimes is slower to adopt to things that are brand new, in a particular market. And you might be able to find people that are early adopters for your product, even though, oftentimes it's something that, that most people would hold off on, as well. And so, there is an opportunity to have a platform again to communicate your more innovative product as well. And then if you want to be a business that better understands your market, again, having a platform and consistent place to sort of communicate your message, is another great way to use podcasting, I feel like, again, to be able to get your message out. And then lastly, small marketing teams, oftentimes have a lot that's going on, but at the same time, wouldn't it be great to have like one place where you're consistently creating material that you can then leverage over and over again, as well, to try and get the message out? What I see oftentimes from organizations is they have bigger campaigns, and then they sort of, you don't hear anything from them for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden, there's another big campaign, right? So you might, rather than having and spending a lot of energy in terms of trying to get out bigger campaigns, having more consistent platform, as well as material that's coming out, would be helpful for the organization. I don't know, Chris, is there anything else that you would add, or you know um, say to any of those as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think understanding your market, just we'll talk about this in the next slide, and getting to understand your customers and helping your market understand you or all the things going on. But particularly for a small marketing team who's chasing a bunch of campaigns, or who may struggle to create their own content or get subject matter experts to write content or executives to write content, this is the simplest way to create a lot of content in many different forms that can be used across all your channels: web, social media, third party. For me, that's reason enough.
Right? Yep, absolutely. All right. And next, trying to get it to move, my friend. There we go. Okay.
There we go. So I'm going to tackle the first three of these to get us started. You can see quite a long list of reasons. The first three sort of fit together. Thought leadership. I like to say your deepest insights are your best branding. And podcasting is just a fantastic branding tool. So whether it's you and your company trying to get out your own thought leadership, or you're inviting thought leaders in your industry onto your podcast, either way, um, I think you become a thought leader by doing either of those things. You are helping your audience, your marketplace, see those insights from the experts, and whether it's you directly or it's reflected back on you by your guests, there's value in that. And I think big this is a gap that many companies aren't taking advantage of, is to get their CEO on a podcast, whether it's your own or someone else's, and have them out there speaking and using clips from that to distribute on social media to get the word out. I mentioned educating the marketplace. It can be hard for anyone to keep up with all the things that are going on in a particular space. So, for example, Don and I are both in the life sciences. There are so many things going on. My second podcast, CC Life Science, covers all kinds of innovations in science in the space, purely based on my curiosity, but the intent is that there's an audience out there who just wants to know all the different things that are going on in the research and drug development space, for example. And when you do that and you're out there consistently, you build a certain level of trust and credibility, which goes to the third point. Um, and if you haven't experienced it, you'd be shocked. And I've experienced it on both ends, the know, like, and trust factor. So when I started out 10 years ago, 9 years ago with the podcast, I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and I felt, I know these people that I'm hearing every week in my ear. On the other side, and if I met them, it's a little bit like meeting a celebrity, because you felt like them. They're in some form of media on a regular basis. And then I went to a trade show, and I had someone who I'd never spoken to come up to me, who recognized me from Twitter, but who was a listener to my podcast, and said, "Hey, you do that thing, right?" And, yeah. And it has happened more than once. So there's a level of trust that people get because they get to hear you on a regular basis, and that builds a relationship even if you haven't spoken to them before, and it makes getting those conversations started much easier.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. And one quick thing back to educating the marketplace. I've actually run into somebody. I was at a show, and then we went to a group of us went out to dinner afterwards, and this one person just kept sort of staring at me, from across the room, and eventually I went and introduced myself, and he said, yeah, I use your podcast actually for education in the life science space, to try and get a better understanding of all the different things that people were working on, because it's a broad, sort of market, right? I mean, it's a, hard to get a grip of everything that's going on unless, you've got some sort resources for that. So yeah. So, in terms of, other places that you can use a podcast and, kind of think about, the things that a podcast could do for you. One is market research. And so, one of the things that I know I gain through a lot of the conversations that I have is just kind of what is it that people are working on, and what's, the kind of critical path to getting their thing to market. And then what places will that item serve once it's, out in the world. And understanding that, really helps me in my consulting business. And so, that was one of the things that I wanted overall, was just stay connected to the marketplace. And it's been a great platform for that. And so if your guests really tie to areas that would aid you in market research, again, that's a great way to leverage a podcast as well. I've seen a lot of people that use their podcast for customer appreciation. So they will have kind of routine podcasts that they do. And then on occasion, they will invite people who are customers of theirs to come and talk about the good that they've had come out of their products as well. And so, this idea of using it for customer appreciation is beneficial both for the customer as well as the business, right? Because you have somebody saying, how great your products are as well. And then, introductions to prospects. So if anybody's ever received one of my connection requests, typically it's, it starts out with, sort of introducing myself. And then once we get to know each other, typically most of my connections that are in life sciences wind up with this, question of, would you like to be a guest on Life Science Success? And so for me, it's another way. I'm not trying to sell something to them. I'm not trying to, sort of get some other benefit, but it's another way for me to get to know people at kind of another level that could be potential clients in the future.
Yeah, I'll just add on to the meeting prospects and networking. I have found that starting a podcast was the most productive networking activity I've ever participated in. Now, it requires a little more effort than showing up to a cocktail party, but you get a little deeper conversation out of those things. When people find out that you have a podcast, it's very rare that someone has turned down an invitation. And often I'm having a conversation with someone without even thinking about a podcast, and they will say something near the end of it. And I go, oh, that's a topic. Why don't we explore that, on another call? And I invite them. But now when I can reach out to people on LinkedIn, I look and I see if they have a story that I'm interested in, something to talk about. And I'll mention, hey, is this a possible podcast episode? Would you be interested? And it's pretty rare that people decline that invitation, because they're looking for ways to get out and get the word out for them as well. And then I've had a few companies come to me and say, we want to do something different. We think that creating a podcast will help us be seen as innovative. Now, there are millions of podcasts out there. Most of them don't last for any sustainable period of time, but it is a way to stand out, because there's text, there's video, and there's podcasts to a large degree. Of course, there are events and campaigns and so on. But it really is different. And I guess I would say that a podcast, whether you do audio and video together or just audio, is different than creating marketing videos. And we are talking about marketing here. And the reason for that is to listen to a conversation or a story in your head. First of all, less likely to be interrupted based on where people listen to podcasts, mowing the lawn, going for a jog, whatever it is, doing chores, as opposed to sitting and having to watch a screen for some kind of marketing video. So that that is the difference that I think it makes. And then, down the road here in a few minutes, we'll talk about what all the other advantages to this format.
Yeah, I think I think in terms of the all of the things that I've done in the midst of listening to podcasts, and certainly I appreciate video podcasts, but I certainly definitely have a different sort of connection to audio only podcasts, or even video podcasts that are also made into audio podcasts, right? So, I mean, it's, to me, it's that ability to be able to do something, you know, in a lot of different spaces really, seems to help organizations as well. Um, and then, in terms of growing an engaged audience, I'll just touch on these last two. Um, Growing an engaged audience really gives you this opportunity to sort of find your tribe, right? Or find the people that are really thinking, of you and your products. And so I think in our space in life sciences, we have some people that are on like the cutting edge of clinical trials and things like that. And so they're releasing new technology that could help people with clinical trials. There's a very specific audience that would be interested in that, and yet you kind of think about this opportunity to talk about how the market is shifting. What are all the ways that you're going to find patients for clinical trials? What are all the problems? There are all these opportunities that would be great, sort of topics as well for a podcast that sort of grows an engaged audience that's only really interested in that one specific kind of topic. And then on the last one, in terms of stimulating earned media opportunities, podcasts for me have been a great way, one, to have other podcasters find you. I mean, certainly, Chris, I reached out to you because I'd reached like the mid-year or end of year or something and wanted to recap all the podcasts. And so I went through, these are all the podcasts in life sciences that I listened to, and yours being one of them. And so I said, hey, would you want to come on a show with me where we talk about these? And we did that together. Also, for me personally, whenever I went to Bio, I went to this industry trade show as a press member, not as a participant of the conference, which is completely different, right? I used the opportunity primarily to conduct a lot of interviews and capture a lot of other media related to the show. And so, that wouldn't have been possible without having a podcast first. And so, again, it's another opportunity for companies, I think, to think about what is the advantage whenever you think about getting on or having a podcast.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I mean, in terms of an engaged audience, imagine you do a 30-minute podcast twice a month, which is, I think, fairly typical for people trying to do this in B2B. Where else do you get to have your voice inside of someone's head for an hour every month? Potential customers. And the people that are willing to do that are, your ideal client, presumably. And then in terms of earned media, I've taken, podcasts I've done, those get turned into articles that can get published in magazines, or those magazines might reach out to a guest and say, hey, we want to hear more about that, or tell us more, or more about something else, but you are the kind of person we want to talk to.
Yeah. I think it's the wonderful opportunity whenever you consider the kind of the um, the overall benefits that people could have as well. So yeah, in terms of the benefits, in terms of the overall benefits, Chris, you want to hop into this one and cover this for folks?
Sure. So again, small marketing team. The top one is my favorite. I mean, this is, to me, the reason to do a podcast. It's the most efficient way to create content, regardless of all the other things. So this is a benefit to you and your company. The audio, great content on its own. Snippets of video, questions and answers cut out and posted on social media. The transcript turned into an article, and then maybe just text quotes on top of an image can create an entire basket, a whole media kit for distribution in all the channels you can imagine. So there's just no easier way. The alternative being to go to an executive or a subject matter expert and say, here's a blank piece of paper. Tell us what you think about topic XYZ. And nobody wants to do that. But if you go prepared with questions and say, let's talk about this for 30 minutes, you'll have no problem. And then you have all the answers right there. It's a cheat, really. It is an absolute cheat. So in terms of consistent messaging, not only saying the same thing over and over again, but being out there on a consistent basis, whether you're speaking to your internal team or your external team, you're there, you're present, you're being seen consistently. I think that's a huge amount of value right there. I did a podcast recently with a CEO of a CDMO, and every other Friday he creates a little video, but it could be a podcast for his team. And one of his team members who'd been with the company a long time before he came in said, I've gotten more out of these videos than I got out of the previous CEO in dozens of years. So that can make an impact on your team as well. I mean, people feel more engaged, whether they're customers or your employees. Validating your ideas. You know, if you're thinking about the people you want to work with and you have ideas, you get to share them. You get their ideas, so you're validating your thoughts. Uh, it's just good feedback. It's a great way to get the feedback. And then in terms of being discovered, YouTube itself is, you know, the second largest search engine supposedly, and so people can find your podcast that way, which is a great way to do it, because if they're not directly looking for a podcast but they're looking for a topic, YouTube is a great way to do it. And then on top of that, Google, which owns YouTube, if you're searching for a topic, is likely to put those videos on the top of the first search page. So yet another way to be discovered and get people into your audience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the one thing for me is just I've been in a lot of organizations where you'll have like a quarterly town hall, and you go back to what you'd said about the consistent messaging. Rather than once a quarter, like you said, I mean, if the CEO is just picking up his phone and every week, you're getting just a short video, or even maybe across a few different leaders having that same sort of thing, and having consistent messaging go out is absolutely critical, for a lot of different organizations. And so, hopefully this has spurred a lot of good thinking in terms of things that people should think about whenever they consider possibly having a podcast as well. And so there's a real true opportunity to do that. I guess Chris, any thoughts in terms of things that come to mind whenever you think about ways that you or I could help?
I mean, of course, we've done the whole thing. So there's all kinds of ways to help, from, as we talked about at the beginning, just getting set up with hardware and software, to hosting, to editing, distribution, and then even coaching. So I have one client now who I'm sitting in on their episodes and helping a little bit with some editing, but also listening to the host of these conversations. And the goal there is to slowly, back out of that situation where I'm not doing any editing, and I'm really kind of teaching that person, how to carry on, think about their interviews, the questions they need to ask, and then make it easy for them to go back into the recorded files and edit it down to the required time, and so on. So anything from setup to hosting to coaching to editing, it's all possible. I don't know, what you're doing.
Yeah, similar situation. I mean, I think there are plenty of organizations out there that seem to want to understand a little bit more. I've also recently created a guide for being a guest. So people who are interested in being a guest, I actually will post that link back into the comment section here on LinkedIn, and so people can grab that that guide as well. I I think that there's a lot of different ways to think about this. One is, do you need your own, podcast platform, or do you, maybe sort of leverage somebody else's platform on a routine basis? I know there's opportunities as well to work with somebody like myself or with Chris in terms of, sort of mapping that out. What's the appropriate sort of channel in terms of thinking about this, because for many organizations, I keep hearing as well that this is just one more thing, which, I mean, you could think of it that way, but at the end of the day, if you think about the fact that you have to consistently get your message out, um, leveraging podcasting as a platform probably is a really good way to sort of think about, this in a centralized manner as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot
Yeah,
of different things that we could do to help.
it could be one more thing. It could replace a couple of other things as well.
Right.
And then, as you mentioned, it's not a bad strategy if you want to dip your toe into it before you start your own, to think about what podcasts could I be on. I mean, that's a way to access a lot of different audiences. There's certainly people who do that, um, and maybe that's a better solution for some people. So your guide to being a guest, and um, and understanding, if you're lucky enough to be a guest on somebody's podcast, and we're lucky enough to have you, how to get the most out of that when the podcast goes live, because it doesn't end at the end of the conversation, right?
Right.
It takes a little bit of, just a tiny bit of effort on the back end to amplify the message when it goes out on social.
Yeah, and I've seen so many people sort of take a podcast almost like it's a point in time. Once the interview's over, that's it, right? And I've seen you do this as well very successfully with several of your guests, where you'll take the material and sort of, break it down, and then have a lot of different social media posts as well with, snippets, not necessarily the entire interview, to try and entice people again to spend the time, go check this out. If this snippet was interesting to you, go check it out.
Yeah, and you mentioned point in time, that just brought up to my mind a lot of the things we're talking about here, because we're not doing a news podcast, is that this is evergreen content. It could
Mm,
be good years from now. And on top of that, one of the benefits of this is when someone discovers your podcast, it's not uncommon that people have told me, now I'm going back through your whole catalog. So they may discover you now, but they don't realize, or they do realize, and now they have to catch up on 50, 100, 200 episodes. I don't think anybody's going that far back in the catalog, but um, those things accumulate, and they they're going to spend more time with you, not just going forward, but going backwards.
yeah. And then now we actually have some time left over for anybody that's currently on with us as well live, to go through any questions that you might have. And so feel free to, in the comment section on LinkedIn, feel free to add any questions that you might have, and we'll try and address those live. Try and give this a minute or two. So Chris, you and I are going to have to talk, because
Uh-oh.
between us, because of the fact that there's always this delay that happens, right? It's not instantaneous, so people have to in the next minute or so, most people will hear the thing that I just said.
Yeah. Well, tell me, I want to ask you, like, maybe what is the most surprising thing you've had, you know, gotten out of a podcast?
That I personally learned from somebody else's podcast, or that
Yeah,
I
something that you learned on your own by hosting your own podcast, or something you learned about podcasting in the course of doing your 200 or so episodes.
I just recently, so oftentimes I listen to, whenever I have free time, right? I like science related podcasts, but I also like legal related podcasts. And I just heard somebody the other day, they were talking about a specific popular case that's going on right now. And they were talking about the fact that you can actually experience double jeopardy whenever you've committed both federal crimes and state state crimes, and that was a surprise to me. So that was like, something that I knew learned brand new, because I always figured that, once somebody was, prosecuted in one or the other, then that was that. But I'm not a lawyer, so it was something that was very educational for me. I remember sitting there going, I never would have thought that. But yeah. So anyway, our great friend Owen Swift actually's popped in a question here for us as well. And so yeah, so Chris, what are your favorite non-life science podcasts?
I used to listen to a ton of podcasts about marketing, not so much anymore. So I have the two podcasts that I listen to pretty regularly are the Prof G Show by Scott Galloway, particularly his office hours. I haven't listened to as many of his longer segments where he's interviewing people. But I have a 15-minute drive a couple times a week. So that fits perfectly with his office hours where people send in questions and he answers them. I get a lot of perspective on different businesses because people are usually asking about that and his just outlook on life. And then on the fun side, Smartless with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett, and I always have trouble remembering the other guy's name from Will and Grace, but those guys are hilarious, and they interview mostly celebrities. But I enjoy that they have fun conversations. There's a little bit of inside baseball in there, but I'm also interested in how the entertainment business works. It's just fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually mine are so I've been listening to a lot of the, like, marketing made simple, business made simple, those sort of things. There's a podcast that uh what's his name, Donald Miller, currently
Mm-hmm.
has out. Chris Ye has a great podcast where they talk about uh the sort of what does it take to blitz scale a business. And so a lot of the things that I do are centered around that as a consultant. So it's how do we properly scale businesses so that they don't feel a lot of the angst and pain that comes along with scaling a business. I've actually had a few entrepreneurs now tell me that the one reason why they're thinking about never being an entrepreneur again is because of the fact that they're having to deal with payroll issues and HR issues and other things. For a long time, it was The Dropout, right? So I was listening to The Dropout as the legal case was happening with Theranos, and kind of things that were going on there. And I also loved for a long time Serial as well. But I'm a true crime fan as well. So I'll listen to the true crime podcast pretty much, anytime that I'm sort of doing something where my mind's not in a business oriented state. But a lot of the stuff that I read and watch and listen to, oftentimes I feel like sort of relates back to the stuff that I do, because it's for me, that's where I have a lot of fun there as well.
I used to enjoy a lot the 30 for 30 podcast from ESPN. I just thought it was really well produced in terms of storytelling. And the advantage of listening to podcasts outside your specialty or your industry is, if you're thinking about doing a podcast, is seeing all the different ways people put their stories together, or how they, just ideas about elements of a podcast that make them successful, make you pay attention. I'm curious if Owen's still out there, if he wants to throw in the chat box what he listens to.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear. Like I said, we there's a little bit of a delay, so we'll have to cover things in between us. I also like Lewis House's School of Greatness. I mean, I feel like he has good guests on. And then Tom Bilyeu, he has that's the guy that created the Quest bar. He has some good podcasts as well that just sort of talk about general things as well. That I feel like he talks a lot about nutrition, and a lot of different topics on there. I'm interested though too, Chris. Do you listen to things at their normal speed, or do you speed them up?
Yeah, I'm a normal speed guy. I have listened or tried to listen at sped up, but I'm not listening to so many that I that I need to go faster. Oh, Demand Gen Live. Is that from Chris Walker? That probably is.
I don't
I
know.
recommend everybody listen to that podcast that Owen is recommending there. If that's the one I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And I might check out Linux Unplugged. It's not what I imagined as a non-business podcast, but now
Right.
you got me curious.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering, is that Linux operating system, I'm assuming? But yeah. Interesting. Interesting always to hear kind of the topics that people listen to. But again, it highlights for me this, not just the personal side, but also sort of, the opportunity from a B2B standpoint for folks. So yeah, I think there's just a great opportunity for people to leverage, podcasting to sort of capture people's attention and get that part of your brain thinking about what's the story that I want to tell.
Yeah, and I should say that podcasts is the fastest growing medium. I just heard something yesterday like linear radio is going to go away and it's going to be just podcasts and you're going to get
Wow.
to pick what you want. But there's no topic that's too narrow, no niche too small. If you have a subject that you're interested in, you can probably find a podcast on it or start your own. I mean, that's and you see, from all of our examples, yours, mine, and Owen's, that people listen to a range of different things. The people that listen to a podcast weekly typically listen to about, I want to say, 7 to 9 episodes every week. Not
Wow.
necessarily of a single podcast, but they're listening to 7 to 9 different shows during the week. And that number of people that listen weekly in the United States over the age of 12, I have it somewhere on my desk here, but it's roughly, I want to say, 30% of people in the United States are
Wow.
weekly listeners and listening 9 times. So
Yeah. Well, it looks
that's an
like Owen
opportunity.
has another question for us in terms of the topic of podcasting. Is there an inherent disadvantage in being able to get the audience feedback and monitor performance of different episodes?
I think I understand what he's saying there. Oh, are you at a disadvantage in terms of being able to get it? So, yes, this is a challenge. If I understand your question right, Owen, knowing who downloaded your podcast is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not building an email list off of that, um, it is a challenge to know who exactly listened, and then you can get download numbers per episode, which is helpful. You'd like to see those going up, and you can tell which episodes have a story that appeals more to your audience. But just because someone downloaded it doesn't mean they actually listened. So that is absolutely the challenge. I've talked to a few other podcasters in our space specifically who, they know they're doing well when people reach out to them and directly and comment. So you're not
Yes.
going to get hundreds of those,
Right.
but you will get enough to realize that, okay, this is one person. There must be, I could see I'm getting a reasonable number of downloads, and some fraction of those people actually reach out to me and say, hey, I love what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny to me. So, I mean, for a long time, I spent an awful long time podcasting. I want to say it was over a year, and I call that an awful long time. And I kept thinking to myself, is this it takes a lot to get guests if you're a guest related podcast, that's probably where the greatest majority of effort comes in overall if you're trying to consistently make sure that you have guests. The and I remember being on vacation, and I was thinking to myself, should I continue this thing overall? And actually, I don't know how many people could see it, but next to the blue book over my head, there's a clear award that's back there as well. And I won the what was it, top 10 podcast in FeedSpot for science related podcast. I got that notification. Then it was the notification for that award was like a US related you know, B2B science related podcast award as well. And it was those things sort of stood out more in my mind as just acknowledgement for all the work, right, that you put in. But at the same time, you're building this audience, and like you said, you have to also try and capture, you know, who's listening, and is there a way to, you know, more directly connect with those people and try and, you know, either have them subscribe somewhere, which we have good subscribership now, you know, I feel like for the podcast. But again, there's, you know, a lot of time where you're, you know, sort of doing these things and sort of questioning, like, you know, is this valuable to people? And then, like I said, you get more of the acknowledgement whenever you go out in the public and people say, man, I've listened to every episode for the last year and a half. And, you know, just can't believe, you know, all the people you've had on, and the great interviews and things like that. So I do agree with that idea of, you know, you're speaking a bit into a vacuum, but at the same time, you're trying to capture, you know, more of that, you know, direct audience as well, and have them engage with you, which is, you know, through subscribing or, you know, giving an email address or something.
Yeah, I would just say if you're going to do a podcast and just publish it and hope to count on, measuring the downloads or knowing who your listeners are, you're missing the opportunity. It's really in those direct connections and all the things you can do with that
Right.
content. So I like to tell people the podcast is not the end product, that's the raw material.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed the other day there, because I get metrics on some of the smaller snippets that we provide as well. And there were by far more views on some of the smaller snippets, um, you know, overall than, you know, than some of the other things that we put out. And it just shows a real advantage, as well as being able to reuse this content over you know, a more broad space, right? So yeah.
Right. And in terms of those snippets, I don't use Instagram. I, occasionally get sucked into reels, but in terms of YouTube and shorts, I have put some snippets up there, and with no effort whatsoever, you get hundreds of views because people are going by, but people do discover you. And I've gotten comments on those things as well.
Right.
People ask questions. Um, I think I put up some of my snippets from the episode on de-extincting the woolly mammoth, which of course gets people's attention. But if you want to be found, put those snippets up on, YouTube, and then people can find your long form channel. That's a path.
Yeah. All right. And so, yeah, so, well, I wanted to, you know, just close with the idea of, you know, hopefully this has been helpful for folks, and, you know, has been, you know, enlightening in terms of, you know, really, you know, talking about what you can do with a B2B podcast. Our current plan is that we would put out the other sessions, and, you know, work on getting those out for people that are interested in this, kind of walking you through that journey of creating a podcast as well.
Yeah, looking forward to the next one. We'll talk more about, what the content can be inside of it, different formats to consider, really the meat of it, and then the last episode, nuts and bolts of getting it out.
Yeah. So, Chris, thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate you, you know, in terms of working with me on this, and helping me pull it together. And you know, for anybody that's still there, thanks a lot for watching us. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for your idea to make this happen. And yeah, thank you everybody who's listening.
All right, take care.